And I truly hope that her siblings have peace and healing moving forward. And not only that they have those things, but that we won't know about it.
Are you ready? Here we go. Part 3, the third and final part of my analysis and discussion and very strong opinions about Shari Franke's memoir, The House of My Mother. You'll want to listen to the end of this one. I swear it's worth it. Ready? Let's go. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2, I highly recommend doing that before diving into this one. We are jumping right in exactly where we left off last time. You will find links to those in the description as well as in the pinned comment. And we'll see if we can manage a link or two and right about here somewhere in the video itself. Anyway, diving right into part 3. Here we go.
She gets involved with the Haymans. They had taken at least part of one of Josie's courses. They thought it was dumb and they dropped out, but they had had just enough interaction with it to understand how messed up some of it was, at least on some level. And so they became a huge support for Shari. They let her stay at their place at times. They absolutely treated her like a child of their own. She actually asked them, "Can I call you mom and dad?" And they were so honored and hugged her and supported her. Shari realizes, I need to get my money into a separate bank account where my mom can't touch it, which was so wise because Ruby did take all of her siblings' money. Shari's original account her mom was on the account because she was young, wasn't 18 yet. But when she hit 18, she had this feeling she should take her money out. Then the family, when they completely cut off Shari, she realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my car. And if you're in this area of Utah, you need a vehicle to get around at all. Public transportation is a joke. And her mom had the title. She asked Mrs. Haymond to come with her to get the title back. Bless Mrs. Haymond. She actually stood up to Ruby and like, give her the papers. We need to go. And in the acknowledgments at the end, she thanks Kevin, and she also thanks mom and dad, which are the Haymans, which I thought was just fantastic. This is about the time when Kevin was finally invited to leave the house. He took Chad with him at first, and then eventually Chad went off on his own. He wasn't allowed to be communicating with anyone else in the family. And he's like, this is the beginning of our family. And she's like, no, this is the beginning of the end. And that's when she kind of fell apart. Her family's falling apart. And that's when the Haymans, she just went to their house and just collapsed in their guest room. And they were like, you are welcome here for as long as you need to stay. She finally did some little sleuthing and found where Chad was staying. Got some of his favorite snacks and went to his door and was planning on just leaving a note and the snacks there. The door swings open and he's standing in the kitchen in plain view. He actually, at this point, he's still kind of brainwashed. And he's like, yeah, you're not supposed to talk to me. That's it. Sorry, bye. At one point, she talks about one of her roommates who was very much on the hyper-conservative end. If there was even a kissing scene in a PG movie, she would buzz through it. And I want to again emphasize that it would be a particularly conservative slice of people, not all LDS people, because there's a full range. But that seems extreme to me. Interestingly enough, it was that roommate, though, that Shari eventually told things about Derek too, which she didn't expect to, but it kind of came tumbling out. And that roommate, surprisingly, was not judgmental. In fact, was mad, saying, Derek took advantage of you. You did nothing wrong. We need to go talk to the bishop about this. And I'm not sure how many bishops we're talking about. It wasn't entirely clear. I know this one is a different one from earlier in the story, but he didn't blame her directly. He did say, I'm not sure what needs to happen here as far as maybe possibly taking away your temple recommend temporarily, which is with the document saying that you're in good standing, and then that allows you to go into the temple. And if you've violated some big laws, then that is a reason to revoke it. At this point, he was like, let me talk to the stake president, which would be the next level up of leadership. And that's what bothers me, is that the bishop didn't take care of it himself. I think he could have. I could be wrong on the policies, but I think when it comes to something like this, he could have. But instead, he went to the stake president. The stake president was like, well, I think we're going to have to believe this Derek guy who denies it. Oh! They apparently released him from his calling, which I'm assuming, again, is Elders Quorum president. Don't know for sure. As far as we know, he hasn't had other consequences. On the other hand, she did hear later he was going to have a disciplinary council but he hadn't lost his recommend. And then that's where I'm like, okay, we've got some definitions, glossary issues going on here, because if he were to even lose his membership, you wouldn't know that until after the disciplinary council. That's where that happens, where they meet and discuss what he did. And the results of that is confidential. The church will never comment on it. If you happens to you and you speak about it, that's how it would get leaked, or if somebody close to them would leak it, but the church wouldn't talk about it. So she hears that he's going to have a disciplinary council, but then his temple recommend wasn't taken away. We don't actually know what happened. However, it does sound like he had friends that were supporting him and defending him, and that makes me ill. And whoever he is, I hope, now that this book is out, someone recognizes who he is, that he gets his comeuppance, because this man should not have any sort of leadership. He should not even have his membership. He should be kicked out on the curb and charged. Period. That's all there is to it. Some other weird glossary church terms. She brought in, as she says, our congregation president, Jim Nelson, into the text conversation for backup, like to have somebody else in there with her mom, and her mom, of course, freaked out over that. You know, to have a congregation president, it would have to be a branch, which is like it's smaller than a ward, which is the typical congregation size. The branch is like it's too small to be a ward. So I don't know what kind of branch she would have been in Provo. The branches are usually, far flung, where there's just not many members, unless it's her stake president, which again is a level up from the ward. I'm not sure what that meant. My own daughter has turned on truth and me, and the outcomes are devastating to your siblings. Okay, now that Kevin's gone, Ruby is leaving the house more and more often, hanging out with Jody 4 hours south in Ivins, Utah. And that's when Shari starts hearing these things, because the neighbors are reporting to her because they're concerned. Okay. Neighbors are dropping off food for her siblings in case they don't have food in the house. So she calls DCFS. Ruby finds out, she calls DCFS and gets completely pissed off. And it just starts to spiral even more. Ruby says, "You've made it abundantly clear that you want nothing to do with this family." Like, what? You're a traitor, Shari. A Judas in our midst. That's a pretty intense accusation. So, not that Ruby has ever made sense, but this is completely contradictory. Shari is deceitful for reaching out to her dad and her brother, and yet somehow reaching out to her father and her brother make her not wanting to be in contact with her family. What? That makes no sense. Shari actually tells her mom, "I never hated you, I was just scared of you." Ruby just makes it all about her. You're like the Romans in the Bible, feeding me vinegar when I'm dying of thirst, crucifying me for your own selfish gains. And that's what I was like, hello? Narcissistic personality disorder. Like, you are literally comparing yourself to Christ? Like, are you kidding me? And then she says, when you're ready to apologize, really apologize, then maybe we can be a family again. But Ruby, doesn't family mean more than anything, supposedly, to you? It talks about the Facebook group that Ruby and Jody had, and how you had to answer. Sometimes you have to answer security questions, like, do you agree to abide by the rules of the page or the group, whatever. And it's just most of the women on the group were actually like secret trolls to see what the heck was going on. And then she goes, "Pass the popcorn," which I loved. Jody never explicitly declared herself a prophet or deity, but the implication hung heavy in every word and action. She had positioned herself as the chosen one, a savior sent to lead the faithful to enlightenment. Gross. Shari started to really freak out when she found out from a neighbor that Ruby had pulled the kids out of school. That is very alarming. And if you recall the Gavin Peterson case here in Utah, that's what his parents did too, or his dad and his girlfriend did. After there had been DCFS calls, they decided to homeschool him, and then 11 months later, he is no longer with us. To Kevin's credit, he is trying to get laws changed in Utah that if a family decides to homeschool, and then there is any kind of DCFS call prior to that or after that it will be taken more seriously. The homeschooled kids will have a little more oversight than that. We find out that Ruby is trying to sell the house. She got rid of the dog, which breaks Shari's heart, of course. The kids aren't allowed to leave the house. They have the blinds closed all the time. They're not allowed. They think that's why they got rid of the dog, so it won't need to be walked anymore. That also makes it harder for DCFS to do crap, because they can knock on the door. If they can't look inside the windows and see problems happening, if they can't actually see anyone inside, they don't have evidence to break down the door at that point. She's trying to get traction with DCFS, and she finally does get some. Investigation is open, but because of that prearranged law that had been passed years earlier, sometime in 2018, she said, there's a caseworker said, we have no evidence of physical abuse, but we're going to do everything possible to get this in front of a judge and get those kids the hell out of there. But they were unable to get enough evidence. So Ruby was finally arrested 9 months later. Thank heavens the kids survived. For those curious, they were able to break down the door, and they did the battering ram after the 2 youngest were found in Jody's home in Ivins, just outside of St. George. There's the whole journal. You can watch a video on that, part of the Ruby Franke playlist. They had been basically down there. He escaped to a neighbor, asked for help. Because they realized there was another child in that house, the police were able to get in without a warrant, search and find the little sister, and then knowing that they had older siblings in Springville, to the north, then the police were able to break down the door at that point because there was reason to believe that the children were in imminent danger, and that's when they can finally do that. Eventually, she actually has some of her aunts reach out, so Ruby's sisters, and that actually was healing and helpful to Shari. Meanwhile, Derek then says that, to help her learn to defend herself, he may just show up in a disguise on campus and jump her. But he does say, I'm only one of the few people in the world who even cares about you. She's just like, okay, no, it ends now. It ends now. That's when she went to her bishop to talk about Derek, and all of that happened. One of the last things Derek did do is he tracked her down. He was following her GPS on her phone until she blocked him. He found her at her aunt's house, and he brought a whole bunch of presents, dropped them by her car, and she was like, no, we're done. Other teachings that Jody railed against social media, claiming it was, quote, corrupting children and turning them gay. Oh, heavens. Films are more dangerous than guns. Okay. This is when Shari started realizing her mother was more than just psychologically causing problems. If your child comes to you on fire, you don't pat them on the head and say, it's okay, I'll help you. No, you beat them and you kick them and you hit them with a rod. You cannot put welts on your child's legs and lovingly apply gauze and expect healing. The way she said it, Shari says it felt different, like sadism, like she enjoyed the idea. Now, I will say, if you want to take the metaphor of a child on fire, you have to get the fire out, and patting them on the head's not going to do that. But beating them until there's welts on their legs is not how you put a fire out. Kevin? We learned that Kevin just quit his post as professor at BYU, and I'm wondering why. It was never explained in here why he did that. I'm very curious as to why. His profession, his specialty was in geology and earthquakes and that kind of thing. So she says, the irony, here was a man who dedicated his life to protecting people, yet remained paralyzed in the face of the catastrophe unfolding in his own family. She starts learning about Chad Daybell and Lori. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is sounding a lot like what Ruby and Jody teach and believe. And oh my goodness, Lori's children are dead. And she's like, oh my gosh, that this is going to happen to my siblings. This is if we can't solve this quickly. She says, for years I've been pulled in 2 directions. One voice commanded me to be the perfect obedient daughter, putting my faith in supposed authorities. But another voice demanded that this time I think for myself, that I have the courage to disobey anyone or anything that tried to dehumanize me or those I love. Freaking men. She was not mindless submission, but faithfulness to my own inner truth, faithfulness to the divinity and sovereign worth of my God-given life on this earth. And eventually she gets the call that the police are at her mom's house and they're going to be breaking in. And she's, again, terrified that the little body bag's going to be brought out. Fortunately, not the case. Ruby and Jody are charged with aggravated child abuse. Defined. It's an ongoing, pervasive, particularly cruel. If you know the details, you know the details. I don't need to go into them here. Jody is just like, oh my goodness, I'm the victim. What's going on? And it was interesting. That was in her police interview that she was like, what? Me? I haven't done anything wrong. Meanwhile, Ruby took her right to remain silent very literally, to the point that The police were like, have you had a stroke? Do you need medical help? She wasn't even responding to yes and no questions like, are you okay? Is your name Ruby Franke? She wasn't. She's absolute silence. It was pretty funny. Apparently, investigators found $85,000 in cash in Jody's house in southern Utah. It appears that that's what Ruby had just emptied out her kids' accounts. And sure enough, we find Ruby saying, I am so misunderstood, and I'm like Joseph Smith and every other martyr, and look at me, I'm so awesome. But there's one moment where she says she heard God's voice when she was driving right before her arrest. She was driving back to Jody's house, where supposedly the spirit said, your children are going to be removed. And I thought, that might be the only true message she received from heaven in this entire thing. Yeah, her kids were removed because of her. Eventually, after all of this happened, the kids have been taken out of the house. Shari's like, I want to go back to the house to get paperwork, to get family trinkets, heirlooms, memories. She has a police officer with her as she goes into the house. She guesses her mom's password pretty easily, and she starts seeing more information evidence about the relationship that Jody and Ruby had that was physical. She didn't read a ton of it, enough to get confirmation that, yeah, that is what was going on, but she's like, I do not want more of this in my brain, thank you very much. Interestingly, she said, was it possible that all the love, all the attraction had been one-sided? And this is referring to Ruby and Kevin. A current flowing from Kevin to Ruby, never quite making the return journey. If Ruby had never truly loved Kevin, what did that make me? The product of a false love, a union where Ruby saw in Kevin not a partner to cherish, but a means to an end, a sperm donor and a sidekick in her grand plans. Bingo. That's what Kevin was. He was a means to an end. Perhaps Ruby's been closeted too. After she went to the house and got those rings and other things, Kevin was just pissed because he's still, remember, in Jody's thrall at this point. Even though she was accompanied by a police officer, he's trying to get her charged with like theft and burglary or something. And the cops, there's body cam footage, you can find this. The cops were like, dude, she lives here too. This was like the house she grew up in, and she had every right to be there, and one of us was with her. No. He said, well, I guess I'll have to talk to my lawyer. Ruby and Jody both plead guilty, fortunately. So Ruby did so largely probably to save her butt and tried to get more leniency. They were both given the maximum. And this is one piece that has been misreported many, many, many times, that they could get up to 60 years. That is not true. There were 4 counts, and each count is 1 to 15 years. However, the law says that those particular charges would give a max of 30. So even though there's 4 charges and they're each 1 to 15, the max is still 30, not 60. Alas. Fortunately, the judge gave them the maximum, which again is not very much. He told Jody that she was so far detached from reality, common sense, and decency that consecutive sentences were the only appropriate response. So yes. After that, they, Chad and Shari and Kevin, they went out. This is, we drove to Cafe Rio, and they had lunch and just talked about whatever. And yes, if you're curious, that is the same chain that Lori and Chad would go to up in Idaho. It is aggravating that it's potentially only 1 year for each of those charges. So the minimum, I believe, is 4 years that they could serve, 4 to 30. Up to the parole board, and that's because Utah apparently has taken on a let's try to rehabilitate prisoner mentality, which I appreciate in most cases, but I'm sorry, 4 years is not enough in this case. I suspect that they will not go too low. I think 4 years they wouldn't dare to, because there's been so much notoriety. The story has exploded. It would be so much backlash. Shari is starting to just looks back on some of the things her mom had taught her, things like intense guilt and shame and self-loathing. And you compare that with her bishop when she first was going to tell him about the whole Derek situation, and she was just scared. And her bishop, not even knowing what was going on yet, assuming it had been a sinful situation, which it was not, he said, hey, whatever it is, it's okay, we're here to heal. To get peace and to heal. That is the point, in theory, of what repentance is. Not to constantly self-flagellate and have constant shame and guilt. She never does talk about how she and Chad reconnected. Just she starts talking about one time when they were together and Ruby called from prison. Still delusional, comparing herself to Jesus. Christ had a bitter cup and he didn't want to drink, but he did because that was his mission. I'm drinking my bitter cup now from prison. And I'm like, okay. And then there's a line that may be my favorite line in the entire book, when Shari says, The delusion was breathtaking. Yep. Of course, there's so much more in here. It's just the irony of this woman who was so obsessed with her family and exchanging her family's privacy for money. Then those very same videos are what helped take her down with her bizarre parenting philosophies and cruel behaviors. Shari helped the prosecution by collecting some of that. She even asked her social media followers, because there were like thousands of videos, can you guys help me find the ones for the show my mother's cruelty? And so people did. They populated this massive Google document. She's able to provide some of that to the prosecution to really give an idea that, you know what, this was happening before Jodi showed up. She fanned the flames and made things worse, but there was already a lot of bad stuff going on way before Jodi ever showed up. And that's, to me, one of the biggest keys of the whole book. Really showed me just how awful Ruby was from the minute Shari was born. And actually even before, when she was basically hunted down Kevin as prey, and then she has been a toxic person from day one. She always has been. I think she really does have a narcissistic personality disorder, because it sounds like her ego and self-worth are so fragile that just being pregnant gave her worth. Being a mother gave her worth. Nothing is ever enough for someone with NPD. You're always seeking the next hit of validation. She talks about how Kevin finally moves home and they're preparing for the younger siblings to come back with them. The first Christmas back, it's just Kevin and Shari and Chad. The younger kids can't come back yet. There's all the DCFS stuff has to happen first. They could decorate their rooms however they want to, though. Talking about her dad, he had been making huge strides mentally and was in therapy, as was I, as we learned to stand side by side again as imperfect partners in recovery from what happened. She is being far kinder than most of us would be. It's sad that she is more of an adult than her own father is, and it just frustrates the crap out of me. They discover that Kevin and Shari both always wanted a cat, so they got a cat. They get two cats. He gets one and she gets one. And just having her own cat, she cares more about her cat than her mom cared about her own children. Her cat is named Muppet. I could only imagine trying to explain to Muppet that his lust for Cheez-Its was distorted and that he was going to be damned. That kind of puts it into perspective. She says, for now, we were united in the same cause, making sure justice was served and the children's futures protected. Yes. However, I want her to understand that she also deserves to be protected and cared for. That she too is a victim. She deserves care as well. I hope she understands that she deserves it as much as her younger siblings do. This is interesting too. She talks about watching the 2020 episode about their family and how she doesn't like how the approach that they used. And this whole section about true crime creators, she kind of attacked the entire industry of true crime. And yet, throughout the book, she talks about watching true crime because that was something that was comforting in a weird way, and she was looking for answers in it. And she also then got her biggest first interview with this book on Good Morning America, which is the same network that does 2020. That she's so anti-true crime and yet was a consumer of true crime. Where the line is of ethical true crime content is something that I try to walk that line. If you watch my whole Ruby Franke playlist, I've never used the younger siblings' names, even though you could find them if you wanted to. I've tried to be respectful, and to me, these kinds of stories help us understand ourselves. We can analyze ourselves better. We can understand society better. Understanding psychology of people around you. Try to effect change in some ways. It's not just popping popcorn and enjoying it at all. There's more to it than that. But it is something to grapple with, and it's something to consider. That looking at just being voyeurs of somebody else's horrible life situation is not something we should do. We should hopefully be doing good, and I hope I am. So in August 2024, this is about a year after her arrest, she gets a letter from her mother. It was written in February, the previous February, and that's when she was sentenced, the month she was sentenced. I don't know when in February she wrote it, but she was sentenced the same month that she wrote this letter. It got lost somehow in files, and then the lawyer found it and passed it on in August. 2 pages were devoted to describing her nursery when she was a baby. It did not contain a single apology or any acknowledgement of anything else that had happened. Any of the reasons she was in prison. No regret, except for the only regret was that she didn't spend more time with Shari before she went to college. That was it. That's her only regret. Like, again, delusion. Ruby doesn't get it. She just doesn't get it. Realizing your own mother was incapable of truly seeing you, of loving you for who you are rather than as an extension of herself, is a bitter pill to swallow. That is the crux. But now she's saying that she doesn't bury her feelings anymore. She speaks up. Every time I allow someone else to sit with their discomfort instead of rushing in to smooth things over, I'm severing another link in the chain of the generational trauma. So Ruby also apparently wrote letters to Kevin. He will never respond to them. Right at the end, she says that the life I've created for myself and the person I've blossomed into are not because of Ruby, but in spite of her. For the first time in my life, I am genuinely happy. I am so thrilled for her. It was a hard read, but one I absolutely recommend. But as I said, her book has light moments of humor, and there's light at the end. And I truly hope that her siblings have peace and healing moving forward. And not only that they have those things, but that we won't know about it. It's powerful stuff. And I wish Shari the absolute best. And congratulations on an instant #1 bestseller on the New York Times. So let me know what you think of this case, and whether you've read the book or you're planning to read the book, and your thoughts. And congratulations, Shari, on your engagement. Don't tell us anything else about anything else in your life that you don't want to. With that said, I think I need to go get myself a piece of dark chocolate-covered marzipan. Haven't had much to eat today anyway, so it's a good thing to eat, right?